In the second part, I want us to talk about the ZIPRA. You are writing a book. You're writing a book about the ZIPRA forces. Right. Tell us more about the ZIPRA forces.
Yeah. When it's a decision that I took a long time ago to document ZIPRA history more than the general ZAPU side of history or the history. So, but of course, cognizant of the fact that itself is a byproduct of ZAPU. There is between the two, but my thrust on ZIPRA, but in cannot talk about ZIPRA without reference to ZAPU. But my approach has been we are going to deal with recourse to violence, because an armed struggle is essentially about recourse to violence, where whites were intransigent, would not give us independence on a silver platter like they did to Botswana, to Zambia, to Malawi. For us, there had to be recourse to an armed struggle. So what I did was to periodize ZIPRA history or ZIPRA in the struggle. And not with the AK that they were later using, the RPDs and RPG, all those sophisticated weapons, no. When the first shots were fired in the armed struggle, it is Zidube Range, south of Mapisa, at a place called Mali, which was a contingent of about 6 people led by Moffat Khatere. The others that I still remember, Elliot Ngwabi was there, Kane Kala was there, Roger Machimini Nube was there, Israel Matuma was there. Who else have I forgotten? I think that's about. Oh yes, there was Rhodes Malaba. That was the group which attacked Zidube Range, marking the firing of the first shots. It's important that we know those first shots were fired by that group in September 1964, and then that would be my cutoff point. Then the second phase, which is phase 2, starts 64. Then now you get training. The people were trained for the first phase. They had gone to countries such as China, 1963. Then others went to North Korea. Others went to Ghana in 1963. Others to Egypt. Others to Cuba. These were the countries where they trained, largely in sabotage. And then second phase, now the Dumisos, Tabengwa, people like Oripot Mpogo, Perigezela Mpogo, Abantafana Akim Jovu, Ethan Dube and others went for the first time to the Soviet Union. And then they come back in 1965 to form the first high command. Kiwani, Abraham Kiwani, Romanyati was the first political commissar. Then you had various other people, Robson Manika, that is the high command. And then now, that's the period. Now, so they are carrying guns now. Abanye gone there to do intelligence. I take that period up to about 69, 70, 71. That's when it was ZIPRA was command. Not called ZIPRA, it was under what they termed special affairs. And the person who had moved out to take command was Uchikerema, with people such as George Silundiga or Nyandoro. George Nyandoro later, Edward Ndlovu joined them. Then there were very few at the time, very, very few people were volunteering to take part. But that takes us to 1971. But the highlights of that phase 2 are the Wanki battles, where Chris Hani was the chief of staff, commanded by one JD, Charles Ngwenya from Zimnyama, and put together, or there was collaboration between IZAPU, Qatas, and EMK, the armed wing of ANC South Africa. That was 1967. In 1966, there had been an advanced party just to reconnoiter and see what route would be taken. Chinga Dube was in that group with people like Oshapshut. They infiltrated via Kazungula, entered Southern Rhodesia via Iwange National Park. Ukubona nje ukuthi athi nxa i-combined force in 1967 ingahamba lapho, where are the sources of water, people that they could make contacts with. And then 1968, Moffat Khatib again leads what is referred to as the Pyramid Detachment. The first one was known as the Lutuli Detachment, Yiwanki Petros, 1967. Then Moffat Khatib prison after the Tuberenge, September 1964, then goes to lead this Polilo. Again, it's a joint incursion between ZANU Katars and the ANC. Some of them went to Kami prison, imprisoned there. Moffat himself escaped, went to Mozambique. The Mozambicans arrested him, handed him over. And he was to remain there until the end of the war. That is the end of phase 2.
So that book ends on phase 2?
No, the book ultimately I'll do all the 4 phases.
Okay.
But right now I'm working on phase 1, researching the G.
Yes.
This is what I'm
the G where they were throwing stones. Which included Oropa Mugabe by then.
Yes, Oropa Mugabe were the leaders of the NDP.
Right.
Komo later becomes leader from about October. He had been in London when the previous party, the Southern Rhodesia African National Congress, was banned. Nkomo was outside attending a convention in Ghana.
Senze ngamthola ke ubaba uPhathisa Nyathi.
Sikhuluma isiNdebele.
Siyahlanganisa. Yes. Ubaba uPhathisa Nyathi, we think this is a lot of people believe this is a treasure. Ulwazi olulapha, ngicebo lapha unzima kakhulu. Greetings, sir. How are you?
No, I'm fine, and you?
I'm okay. Who is Phathisa Nyathi? Where did he come from?
When I was born on the 10th of July 1951 at Kezi, which is just over 500 kilometers south of Bulawayo. It's within Matobo district. So this is where I was born and attended primary school. Sambonjana is the name of the place where I was born, and did my primary education there. And then from there, it's a Salvation Army area. Our school had been opened by the Salvation Army in 1947, I think. Then I proceeded to another Salvation Army institution, which was Mazowe Secondary School, just north of Salisbury, then now Harare, Form 1 to Form 4. And then after that, I went to train as a science teacher at the Gweru Teachers 1973. Then went to teach at a number of secondary schools, starting at Loreto Mission in 1974 up to 77. Then went to Asha, went to Howard, came to Bulawayo, St. Columbus, Sohukas, then became lecturer. I had done 2 degrees of South Africa. I was lecturer at the Gweru Teachers College, teaching education and culture. And then after that, I became the head of a school, Cloak Secondary School, from 1985 until 1993, when I came back to Bulawayo again to head. Then became education officer.
Who is a Bible with information, with everything. You are working now for yourself. You finished, you retired from the council, and then you didn't do anything after that. You have written so many books. You are a historian. Were you majoring in history in most of those studies?
No. I think writing was in me. Heritage, that science knowledge has come in handy for me. I know there is a myth from people who do not know, who think our African culture doesn't have science. It's all nonsensical. It's how we interpret that science, how we understand it, but the principles are the same. And I have given examples that do demonstrate that our people knew science, but they do not explain it, interpret it the way I, as a science person, would. For example, I'll show you one good example. When beer brewing is a simple chemical process, but to them, they don't see it from that angle. But when they're about to strain the beer, what will happen there is the lady will be sleeping where the pots are, and she will be checking, lighting. They didn't have matches. She would light something, some brand, iskuni, and she would be taking the flame into the pot, top of the beer that is brewing there. Now, and when it extinguishes, they know it's time to start straining ukuhluza. Sekupumi language. As a science person, I know what it means is, we say, oxygen supports combustion, carbon dioxide does not support combustion. We know that.
Correct.
So what is happening there is, when the flame goes out, it tells you now the level or amount of carbon dioxide which has been produced has reached that level where now it is extinguishing the flame. It tells you a chemical process whose byproduct is carbon dioxide has taken place. That's how I'm explaining as a science person.
Right.
Because the yeast cells are digesting through the process of respiration. It's a chemical process. The byproduct is carbon dioxide. The lady, my grandmother, will not talk about carbon dioxide. No. But science will say, yes, there is carbon dioxide and doesn't support combustion. For her, it's our people construct granaries. When they want to protect their grain, they will put the grain in a granary, a hole, one of several holes within the granary, and add ash, very fine. Now, what they will not tell you is exactly what are they doing in chemical language. They do know what is happening, which is destroying the insects. But how? Now, I come in as a science person. My mother will mix the grain with the ash from umtswiri. It has to be a non-poisonous tree. And then she will seal the entrance into that hole, compartment, and then applies watery mud. Finished. That's just done. That's how they do it. But exactly what are they doing? In scientific terms, their science is the same as the Western science, but the language used and the interpretation is different. From science, we know that an insect has an abdomen, a thorax, and a head. On its abdomen, it has got tiny openings, which we call spiracles in science. What my mother is doing is to close those tiny holes which she can't even see. So there is a time, I've said, when Africa used to have this scientific knowledge. Africa degenerated over many years. Now we don't know that but what remains is practical application of this scientific knowledge. So she is blocking the ash that she ate, blocks those spiracles, which is what we term asphyxia, again in science. Now the insects will die, but then when she closes the compartment with some lead, mud lead, and then water, is to cut communication between what the inside and the outside. If oxygen moved in there, into the compartment, then those insects will survive because there is entry or they are receiving oxygen from outside. So she cuts off that, and she knows she uses a watery mixture after applying the the mud lid. She then closes that with something, seals with something water. Then it means no communication between what is inside and what is outside. That's asphyxia. But you find it in nature. Have you not seen donkeys? Donkeys will have mites on their bodies, and they know signs, by the way. Then they will go to a midden, a slaughter, where we throw the ash, where our mothers, sisters throw the ash every morning, a slaughter, we call it a midden. Then it will get onto its back, and then that's what it is doing. Now, what is the donkey doing? It is very fine to clog spiracles found on the abdomen of the insect. It's doing exactly what my mother is doing, but no interpretation is proper.
Most of you have been waiting anxiously what has happened. Like I said, umuntu busy ubaba uNyathi. So keep my meeting so he's back. We're done phase 1 and phase 2.
Yeah.
This is a book about the zebra, about the struggle for struggle.
Yeah, phase 3 starts about 1971, when now the fighting arm of ZAPU is named Zimbabwe People's Revolutionary Army. I'm quite aware that
it was named in 1971.
1971. That's when we had the name Zebra. Yeah, when they were reorganizing it, following a split within the movement, the March 11 movement, had people such as Philemon Mabuza, Cain Matema, people like Omzileti, people such as Pegumusa, Kumalo, and many others. There were quite many of them. Omasatini, Ompofu. That was in March 11 movement. And then following that split, ZAPU was reorganized now with Nigita Mangena taking over as commander. And then survivors from the previous high command, people such as Urepoti Mpogo was there, still was there, under Nigita Mangena, and then Abantu Fanalo, Ambrose Mtiniri, they were still there, and a few others. So from 71, it's now becoming more and more, I think, a serious party this time. And more people are joining the struggle, as from 1971, 72, 73. However,
what is Nkomo incarcerated now?
Nkomo is in detention. They had been arrested in about April or so in 1964, and remained in detention until 1974. We'll probably explain why that's significant, and it's going to come in phase 3. So there were more people that were offering their services or joining the liberation struggle. Training at that time was being undertaken in Morogoro in Tanzania. Zambia didn't have a training camp at that time. Probably the first one really comes about 74, 75, about that period. But otherwise, the earlier people trained in Morogoro. So one thing that we observed, then 71, the war is picking up under Nigita Mangena. And one other thing that happened, General Spinola of Portugal had planned a coup, they staged a coup, which then began the independence, or the processes towards gaining of independence of Angola and Mozambique. Now, that meant, I think there are people who tend to think our war of liberation was between the whites in Rhodesia and the Katas of ZAPU and ZANU. It was not like that. If you imagine the war in that manner, you will not understand what was happening and what then subsequently happened in Kukurawundi. You will never understand Kukurawundi if you don't contextualize that struggle properly. That coup was now posing a threat to an area which was geopolitically important. I'm now talking about Southern Africa. That struggle was, our struggle is best understood in the context of a Cold War between the communist bloc, the Warsaw Pact, and the Western powers, the NATO. Now, this is the competition that was taking place, and we should not think it is all over now. No. So ZAPU and the ANC, MPLA were supported by the Soviet Union,
right.
the Eastern Bloc. So what it meant now is, and yet the Rhodesians themselves were allied to the Western world, NATO. So that is the war. So America especially, and America was not our colonizer, but Britain was. They panicked when they saw that coming. And their response, in fact, they had many responses, but one of them was to release the political detainees. Both at Sikombela, those who were ZANU, and those who were at Konabutsingwa, that's the ZAPU side. They were released in 1974. So they had been in. Yes. Was a well-calculated strategy. Those who were prosecuting the armed struggle outside had incorporated what we might term an ideology that was Marxist-Leninist in approach. Now, the West obviously didn't want that, but they knew that the nationalists in detention were not of that ideology. All they wanted was independence, get into the shoes of the whites, and become the new rulers, full stop. It was not liberation as some of us understand it, that they were going to sit down and say, what did colonialism do to us, and seek to reverse. They were not seeking to reverse colonialism, because it wasn't just political, it was also cultural, it was social, it was spiritual. But they didn't bother about all these other facets. They were interested in politics, in getting to rule. That is what the whites knew that. So they released them. They knew now there was going to be conflict between the nationalists and the guerrillas, those who were fighting from outside. Indeed, that's exactly what happened, both within ZANU and ZAPU. So there was that tension. And some of these people were eliminated. Again, the eliminators, being whites, do it in such a way that they will create an impression that it is struggles within the struggle. There's nothing like that. The hidden hand that was behind all these things was hidden, and some people can't see it, but there was that hand. When people went for training as far back as 1962, 1963, whites had sent together with these people some agents who trained in the Soviet Union, they trained in Egypt, they trained in North Korea, they trained in Cuba. Our own people, but serving as agents. And that was there throughout. The Selous Scouts had been created to cause confusion within the movement and between the two movements, hate each other. If they killed Zipra, they'll get their uniform, and then, and cause conflict between ZANA, between Zipra and ZANA. Sometimes they would say, Zipra, come, let's align ourselves and kill ZANA. Selous Scouts were dead. But unfortunately, some people don't know what the Selous Scouts were doing. Some beautiful girls were sent by Ian Smith out there to Zambia.
These are plagues.
Oh, yeah. The beautiful ladies from Bulawayo. Some of them were infiltrated. And some of them wanted to get to the high command. And indeed, some of them managed. They were extracting information. So they knew what was happening. And there was collaboration again between the CIO, Central Intelligence Organization, and Ken Flower, which had been formed in 1974 and was more or less incorporating the previous special branch, which was now the executing arm of the laws that they were putting in place. So that period was a troubled period. But there is this collaboration between CIO, Special Branch, and Western intelligence organization, just bartering information. If some guerrillas have been captured, what is the Soviet Union using their communication system? Please, let's share information, because they also wanted to counter the Soviet Union. So that's what the struggle was all about. But let's appreciate that that period when Nikita Mangena is commander is the period when raids into Zambia took place. Chimoyo had been raided earlier. Zambia was raided not earlier than 78, as far as I can remember, about September 1978. Nikita had already been killed.
Who killed him?
Yeah. Now this is the issue. It's people don't see. Sometimes people want to think Zimbabweans were fighting wind or air. They forget they were fighting people with a counter strategy. People who were radicals were people like Nikita Mangena, people like JZ Moyo, people like JD. This is the ZAPO side. All of them were eliminated. And that's detente. It's what we call detente in 1974. When Kissinger released the detainees. But you see, it's done in such a way, we know. There was a man called Asaf in Zipra. At that time, there were people who had been trained in Angola, and these were thousands. Because from 1977, thousands of people were hitting Jane Ngwenya's call to come, and what she was targeting Wenela. So you had a lot of people from South Africa joining. Now, because the numbers were vast, what they then did was move from guerrilla training to conventional or regular army training. This is not to say they stopped guerrilla training. They continued with that one. But the large numbers at Nampundo, which was the transit camp, then they were being taken to Angola in the main. Angola was further away from Zambia and thought it was fairly safe. But as you know, the Rhodesians used to attack even there. So we are really talking about Nikita Mangena. I said Asaf was taking some people from Angola who were being sent to the front. When they got to Kavanga, they then were going towards the gorges. The Rhodesians were already there. So they waylaid them, ambushed them, killed them. Nikita insisted in wanting to go to see them and probably bury them. Nkomo had refused. Nkomo was, by that time, which was following the death of JZ Moyo in January 1977. Nkomo then relocated, went to stay in Zambia. Then said, no, don't go, it's not safe. Went to Kavanga. There were other people, that some Rhodesian blacks that had been in Zambia. They also advised them, the Tagas, for example, advised him, please don't proceed, it's not safe. Nikita insisted. He had taken with him Uskoke, some people may know Kenel Sikoke, and then Jivan Masego were also there. Remember, there had been an assassination attempt on Nikita earlier. Yeah. So they abandoned their Land Rover. But now he was feeling pain from his knee following the earlier injury. So he recalled the Land Rover to come and pick them up. When they got in there, as the lorry was turning to proceed, then the landmine went off. It just blasted them. Skoke was there, as he told me when I interviewed him many years ago. He went up and landed on his, I don't know what they call this, so that's what saved him. So Jivan Masego also survived. But Nikita ultimately died. But the Selous scouts want to make, or did make, maximum benefit out of that. You don't kill the commander because it has got a psychological effect. You don't leave it at that. Kill him, make it appear is internal work. This is where we don't understand what was happening. The Rhodesians were there and they were targeting the Zipra fellows. So they would say, no, it's internal work. Because Joshua Nkomo moved outside.
Right.
Was there from about, following soon after the
So this is in Zambia?
This is in Zambia, 1977. Mm-hmm. He was there permanently.
So this is how it is all twisted to say Unigeta was killed by fellow cadres in Zambia.
Yes, exactly. But you see, they fail to, it's people perhaps who don't understand how the Selous scouts operated. Mm-hmm. That was their business. That was their business.
Cause all the confusion,
confusion,
and chaos.
Cause hatred, cause mistrust. ANC, ZAPU, combined infiltration. 67 and 68. Thereafter, nothing. What had happened? Obviously, that was a threat to the Western world. Obviously, Western intelligence was at work. One way of confusing Africans, cause them to fight, is to remind them of their tribes. Then they will fight for tribes. You will see it again in
I know,
Zambia.
it happens a lot.
That's common. It was, they worked on these things. So up to now, there are people who believe, because at one time, I think Joshua Nkomo tapped Nigita on his head, a 7th Yaki. So which to the supporters of Nkomo was tantamount to a death sentence. So he was, they would tell you funny stories. Oh, he was a sellout. I've never believed all those funny stories. It is coming from people who don't understand how the Rhodesians worked, how they operated, how they infiltrated Zipra, how they infiltrated Zanda. They knew everything that was going on.
So basically the Rhodesians caused the division between ZANU
and ZAPU. Oh yes. The ZANU itself, how ZANU was formed, we don't want to go into that.
Yeah.
It was the Western agents. You need the book. I remember when I tried and succeeded, interviewing Squilly Moyo, I think in the early 80s, he would say to me, please go and read this book, For the President's Eyes Only, written by John Bloomer.
Is it available?
Oh yes, it was made available. It was available.
Now it's not available.
I don't think, but perhaps on the internet you may find it. So that book will the library here in Zimbabwe, here in Bulawayo, I said, okay, we know you to be a researcher, we'll give you the book, but otherwise we don't lend this book. For the President's Eyes Only. The president that they were referring to is Kenneth Kaunda. The special branch had infiltrated Zambia. They helped Zambia to form its own intelligence network, or perhaps its intelligence body, its intelligence organization. So that when in 1963 both ZANU and ZAPU go out to prosecute the armed liberation struggle, they were moving into the hands of Zambia's intelligence organization created by the Rhodesians. That's what Squilly was telling me about. So you will see them, the special branch, working on certain people, particularly Leopold Takawira, Henry Hamadzirip, and others who were working within what was known as the Capricorn, I think Southern Rhodesian Capricorn Society. Was these were people who were trying to push the agenda of politics of partnership, blacks and whites working together. So they started working on these. I remember one that I still remember, though I'm one without a memory. The whites would undertake a bombing and then write a note and write confrontation. I remember that one very well. Deliberately misspelling the word confrontation, so that it would seem like it's done by Africans and the ZANU element of these Africans to cause confusion. But it's sad because this is things that our own people do not seem to grasp, do not seem to understand even now. And this is why you will see a total misrepresentation of Gukurahundi. As I have said, there is no way you will understand Gukurahundi outside the context of the Cold War. Do not believe that the Western world didn't know what was happening. They knew very well, but ZAPU had to be killed, and ZAPU was killed. But why? And again, do not think they were killing Ndebele people. This is when people don't understand what's happening. But the people who died, yes, were Ndebele.
Majority, yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Well, it was predominantly Ndebele.
Yes.
Why? In 1963, when the split happened, the people who did not get out of ZAPU were Ndebele, plus the Zezulu. But in 1971, the people who get out of ZAPU are the Zezulu, Chikere, Manyandoro, and others. So the Zezulu were out. Inevitably, what it meant was ZAPU now is predominantly Ndebele, Kalanga, and the southwestern groups. That's what. But the West is targeting a Soviet-sponsored political movement.
Which is ZAPU.
Which is ZAPU. But who is in ZAPU? Mandebele. So bona bathi ubulala iZAPU bese bebulala Mandebele. And they knew everything that was happening. They knew. We didn't know, but they knew. Ukuthi i-agenda is to completely destroy ZAPU political infrastructure.
So this was definitely engineered by the West.
They knew everything. They don't be told funny stories.
No.
They knew everything. They had to eliminate ZAPU. It had to be destroyed.
Why was it? Because it's dangerous?
No, it's because it's supported by the Soviet Union.
All right, you're right.
It's the Cold War. That's why I said, if you don't understand the Cold War situation, it's the Cold War. Gukurahundi has to be understood at three levels.
Right.
It's local level.
Right.
The hatred between ZANU and ZAPU, which then became kind of Ndebele, but even that is not quite true. There were too many Shona people who knew nothing about Gukurahundi. Gukurahundi was known by those who were in the army, in government. No, not all the Shona. It's wrong to look at it that way.
No.
That is one, the first level. I've written a book on dissidents. The book is available. Those who want it can buy it. It was super ZAPU. People should know. But they pose as dissidents. So when you look at dissidents, it's not a straight issue. You need to research and find out. You have genuine people who became dissidents. Others who said we are not going to become dissidents. Yes, we are being persecuted within the army. But we are not going to fight the government. Some of them became refugees at Duke. Duke became a recruitment center. A lot of people were recruited from there. With Super ZAPU, which was engineered from the Limpopo province.
This Super ZAPU is to prevent the original ZAPU joining with Mkhondwe Sizwe to top your appetite.
Yeah. They didn't want, because you see, what you should appreciate is ZIPRA and ZANDA were operating from Zambia, where the bases were.
Right.
But that is not what the West wanted to happen in Southern Africa. South Africa itself didn't want that. If ZAPU had won the elections in 1980, chances are, in fact, it's not chances, it's almost definite.
Yeah.
They were going to host MK.
Here.
And
Closer to South Africa.
Closer. And MK would have been closer to South Africa. So South Africa wanted a dead ZAPU, a dead ZIPRA. And indeed, it is true that ZIPRA was actually hosting some of the MK people. Thabo Mbeki was arrested here in Bulawayo. You know it. He went to serve. Was detained in Kami for some time. So even though some of them, the military people, didn't join the National Army, some of them of Velapi interviewed Velapi quite extensively. They were hosting these people. So they were together. So they were going, South Africa, therefore didn't want ZAPU to exist. That is now at the regional level. Hence Super ZAPU and a lot of, if you ask somebody like Jeremy Bricky, they will tell you, they know what was happening. Then at the international level is the Cold War. the struggle between the East and the West. And the West did not want the Soviet Union to have a strong foothold in Southern Africa. It's strategically important. Important, one, in terms of its resources. Two, Angola and Mozambique have already fallen into wrong hands. They would not allow Rhodesia to fall into the same, go the same route.
It was up.
No. Then you'd have, it is the Soviet Union which would have won. They didn't want that. So ZAPU had to be killed as a party. But then when you come to the practicalities, who are these people in ZAPU? Amandebele. So, that's not the issue. The issue is kill the party that is supported by the Soviet Union.
What happened at the Lancaster House, Kunapan, it dealing to eliminate, whereby maybe Mugabe went alone as an PF and they changed from Patriotic Front?
Yeah, you should appreciate. If the Patriotic Front went in as the Patriotic Front, it was not going to work. Because within the Patriotic Front, there was the ZAP, which was being supported by the Soviet Union. In a way, therefore, Soviet Union would have been close to that independence.
Right.
But as things turned out, Mugabe rushed, left Lancaster, went to Mozambique, Tanzania, and said they were going to fight it alone, held their National Executive Committee meeting and decided to go it alone. That was the tragedy in Zimbabwe. So that eliminated the Soviet Union. Right. And as you know, the Soviet Union was probably among the last countries to open a mission, an embassy in Zimbabwe after independence.
Yes.
Yeah, but what was our teeth? What was the problem with the Soviet Union to the Zimbabwean government? So it's the West which didn't want the Soviet Union. So they were prevented from opening the embassy. And yet the tragedy again is the people that had supplied us with arms were now out there. Then those that had denied us independence and did not give us weapons were the first beneficiaries of our own independence. And in any case, you should know, I've argued in my books, that Lancaster House talks had nothing to do with giving us independence, but checkmating the Soviet Union. ZIPRA had been armed to the teeth. I'm not aware of any liberation movement in Southern Africa which had been armed to the same extent.
And highly trained.
No, surface-to-air missiles, they had downed an aircraft in 1978, another one, if I count, in 1979. They had dangerous weapons. They had formed the regular brigades who were ready to march. They had what they call the turning point strategy. The turning point strategy is what prompted Lancaster, and Lancaster was to forestall an outright military victory in this country. And there was no military victory. And the Soviets knew it. They advised ZAPU, but ZAPU would not listen. That if you go to talks, you have lost it, and they lost it.
So Nkomo didn't listen.
They didn't listen. They had been advised by the Soviets. Talks, that's the end of ZAPU, and that was the end of ZAPU. But its losing of elections was not the end. You never know; it could have survived in future. So it had to be crushed. The crashing,
and they did crash it.
And they crashed
big time.
And that's Kukura. So they were crashed. Big time. And they never resurrected again. No, never.
And where are you during that time of disturbances? Were you still in...
No, that time I was a teacher. Wait, no. Kukura Wundi.
They never targeted
I was a teacher here in Bulawayo.
They never targeted
you
survived.
I was at St. Columbus, a teacher at Sobukazi. I was a teacher. So that was the time when these things were happening. Yeah.
So that's part 4 of the...
it was actually when we went into part something.
Yes.
Beyond part 4, because we are dealing with ZIPRA history. Yeah. And the ZIPRA history is part... perhaps let's just a few minutes deal with the last one. That was the Nikita, the raids into Zambia, into Mozambique. That is phase. But after now, there's an influx of people to join the armed struggle, others going there as refugees. Then that's when regular army training takes place in Angola, at Kohima for the officers, at Mulungushi for others. So that's why they end up with a number of brigades, 4 or 5, I'm not sure. And the women had been constituted into a brigade. They were at Mkushi. So you had all these. Joshua Nkomo was just waiting to give a signal. That's now 77 to 79. That is now. ZIPRA is well armed. And the Soviets had come into Zambia to assist with the training. They were trained, they were supervising the Cubans who were training ZIPRA in Angola.
Sure.
So everything was ready now for what they were terming the turning point strategy. Some had trained, they were going to get assistance into bringing in the MiG fighters, and then the engineering. They had all the departments necessary in a conventional army. They were going to come in through Chirundu, through Karipa, and then also through Victoria Falls. Just march in. But it was not to be, because surveillance is there. So the Western intelligence organizations knew everything. They were aware of the weapons that had come from Salam down to Mbeya and then to Chambeshi, the northwestern part of Zambia. They were aware of all those arms that were being delivered to ZIPRA. And it's going to happen. Then during, conservatives had just won. Margaret Thatcher had become the prime minister. And so at Chokam, with his commonwealth of what. Yeah, it was held in Lusaka in 1979. So they decided talks, and then by September 1979, the war was raging, but Lancaster House talks commenced by December, almost Christmas time. Ceasefire broke out, and then the generals came in. That was the end. Effectively, that meant the arsenal that ZIPRA had assembled came to naught. They brought the weapons at Kwai, and the whites who were in CIO still continued to serve the Zimbabwean government. Now they were double agents, working for the South Africans but also working for Zimbabwe, and they were up to mischief. They knew what was happening to the weapons. They knew the arms caches that were taking place. I think it's
who took those weapons to those farms? Who actually?
No, it's ZIPRA, which was.
So those were not planted by the regime.
No.
Or they planted by ZIPRA themselves.
No. ZIPRA brought the weapon. Important assembly point was Kwai. This is where even the regular units were housed with the weapons. They came by train. Another one of my books deals with that. One in Chasbanda, who is now late, paid for the transportation by rail of those weapons and then taken to Kwai. But you see, people like Callaway, who was a CIO operating that area, they knew everything. And in any case, Callaway were working very closely with some of the commanders at Kwai. So they knew everything.
Yet it was a double agent.
Yes, they'd become, most of these whites had become, it's them who were sabotaging Amaloku's Othonil Air Base, Bachisi Fremachina in Komo, Bachisa, so that there would be friction and war between ZAPU and ZANU.
And it happened.
And it happened. Oh yeah, it happened. It happened. But you see, these things, unfortunately, are not known. Most people don't know these things.
No.
So they will never understand why we end up. For them, it seems things start with Kukuraundi. No. There's been a build up towards Kukuraundi. Kukuraundi is the end. So some people see the end. They don't know where it started. Yeah.
Hey. The West men, yeah. And they know how to play that game.
Oh yeah. You see,
they've caused so much conflicts around the world.
One time I was speaking to, I think it was Jonathan, where I said, but Lina, you don't have the desk. America, Britain, they will say the Africa desk. It's there.
It's there.
They are studying Africa. If they want to intervene, they know exactly where. They understand our own now better than ourselves. So, why don't we have our own Europe? Yes, our states.
Perhaps I have to stop going there to the Africa desk, because they always invite me.
Yeah.
At the Commonwealth, they come to the Africa desk, they want to talk to me about scrap. They start asking a lot of questions.
This is what I'm saying. They know about us.
Right.
It's because they have an Africa desk.
Right.
From morning to evening, their interest is Africa. But what interest is it? It's economic. It's not political. No, it's economic. We have some strategic minerals in this country, which they want. They don't, lithium. We know we have lithium. We know
diamonds.
We have oil, a lot of oil. We have diamonds. We have other strategic minerals. But they know them because you can, through area survey, they get to know their technology is advanced. They know what is underneath. And you look at Africa, where there are political flare-ups, there's Boko Haram or this and that. Just check, I always say, check what is below the feet. It's strategic minerals, oil in particular. Where there is oil, there is trouble. If Mzarabani has got oil, it's got trouble for us. Yeah.
Right, that's part 4. All right, the book is...
Right,
yeah, the book is ready to come out when? Not yet.
No, the book will come probably the last quarter of the year. Hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, the last quarter of the year. I'm here talking about phase 1 of Zapu Zipra in the armed struggle. But the biographies of Nikita Mangena, George Slundiga, and Edward Nkomo, I think those will come out much earlier. I think we are within a month we will be getting into production to produce those 3 biographies. They are not biographies which are just written. They were written a long time ago, but we kept them. I wasn't a publisher at that time, but now since I am a publisher, I've revisited them, and I was also looking at the content. And I was saying, once upon a time, I think I was very energetic and prolific. So there's a lot of information, and I sometimes wonder where I was getting it from, but I look at acknowledgements. I interviewed a lot of people.
You did?
I had a lot of energy that time.
Right.
Yeah, so those will come out first.
Right. Now my main worry now, we got our independence. Our culture, our language, what I'm seeing around in schools, what I'm walking in the streets, seeing the way our language is destroyed. When we've got a Bible in you here, who is not consulted even to help people to write proper Isindebele, to write proper literature, the adverts on radios, the adverts on television, actually doing so much damage to our languages, especially Isindebele. It really breaks my heart when you are here as a historian, the person who knows what is happening.
I think what you need to appreciate regarding our culture is that it is a culture which was defeated. We are talking about a defeated culture. In 1893, 1896, that culture was defeated. When people lose a war, they begin questioning themselves whether their ways are right. Indeed, in 1893, when the Ndebele soldiers were defeated, they said, so they began to query everything cultural about us. Our culture was demonized, our culture was denigrated, despised, and this sadly has remained the case to this day. There are people who don't want to associate themselves with African culture. They find it an embarrassment. They are very happy when their children cannot speak in Isindebele. Very happy and excited. And the parent is very happy about that, which is a tragedy. But we do observe that there seems to be some reawakening now, particularly the people in the diaspora. it is when you begin to appreciate its value. Because they are out there, they realize, we are missing something. Where is that culture of ours? And they are now surrounded by foreign culture. Their children, who was that one? I think it was Lukum Kandla, who was showing me some video of his son's children trying to, or the father was trying to teach them in isiNdebele. Zero, akula lutho. These are the people who are beginning to appreciate. Abanengi in the past didn't really think it was their duty to preserve isiNdebele. So they did nothing. And there has been a deterioration, even in language itself. Akusela pride. See, the tragedy, if you read my articles, I did refer to the time when there used to be Radio Mtwagazi. Language was given emphasis at that time when Amoni Amambi was in charge. The language that they spoke is isiNdebele. I would be proud of it. See, isiNdebele. But then, when independence came, I wrote in my article, Mtwagazi, the name itself, became a feared or hated name. Mtwagazi was irritated the language. Unfortunately, when it comes back, when we have skies, the people meaning that one, Bancane, ulimi kalukho kubo. So it is not filling the gap which was, or the void which was created by the demand of Radio Mtwagazi. But in some of these things, let us not say there's somebody out there oppressing us. We are oppressing ourselves. I've said, and I'll continue to say, as long as no one has come to me and said, stop writing, then let us not blame other people. I've never been stopped by anyone, directly or indirectly. I've been writing. I started writing way back, perhaps even earlier than independence. I've never stopped. No one has ever in my writing. Sometimes I'll write things political. When no. Let me talk about it.
Yes.
Consultation did happen, but not with some of us who are cultural, who are arts, but politicians. Now, for them, they thought, now once you resurrect this Ndebele monarchy, it's going. For our history, it was all gone. This is why the South Africans still are better than us, because they maintained their kingships or their monarchies. The monarchy is very ceremonial and was going to remain so. I don't know where people got this.
So there was never going to be any secession? No.
Never. That I can tell you. As long as some of us were there, it was not going to be secession. But we were not consulted as culture people. They consulted politicians from this region, some of whom had no political constituents. And I think they said, no, don't allow these people. So it was not allowed. I would have advised them, it is very good and enjoyable to rule a people who are happy. If these people are obsessed with their kingship, they want to restore it, and it's monarchical and it's not executive, it's not a threat to anybody. But are you saying Ramaphosa, are you saying he's not the head of state? And yet there is king among the Venda, king among the Xhosa, king among... They are not a threat. These are ceremonial people.
Yeah.
And they are rallying point for the culture. Full stop, nothing else. But, so you still have this yearning. What people should know and understand is, the whites decided on their own to come up with a new political dispensation in which monarchy was given second place, ceremonial. We did not chase away our king. This is what people need to understand. We did not. Lopengula was chased away by whites. So we still wanted to beat our drums. Remember, especially when it relates to the Ndebele state. It was a state, a nation that had come into existence in 1820. By 1893, it was gone. So it will take a lot of time to have these people, the descendants of that nation, just forgetting about the nation. When you look at the Shona in their different monarchies or chiefdoms, they had been there for a very long time, which is good. But not so with the Ndebele. And that has political implications. They will still yearn for the restoration of that monarchy so that they continue with their drums. They didn't enjoy them. 1820 to 1893 is finished. So that was a tragedy. So they didn't chase Lopengula. And again, it has even implications on our own political governance. You will want to rule like your own ancestors. How did they rule? You get it from that. Then the other one, which is disastrous, if not more disastrous, is the colonial project. They were ruling us, but how were we ruled? Sometimes people talk about democracy. I say, but what are you talking about, you people? Where was democracy and these campaigners for democracy when we were ruled? All those repressive laws, Law and Order Maintenance Act, Unlawful Organizations Act, and then you talk about the rule of law, you talk about democracy, you talk, what are you talking about? It doesn't make sense. Who has since taught these people democracy? When we were our ancestors were enslaved, taken to the Caribbeans, to the United States, where was democracy? Where was the rule of law? Then I say, something is wrong. You have forgotten. But now, it's a language that is being used. So anyway, the kingship issue was unfortunate. But, of course, you look at what has since happened. Then we saw, we had resurrected somebody. Then we said, but because the reason why they